This all started about 1 year ago. I'm 23 years old and I've lived in the same apartment complex my whole life. The building is mostly made up of families with children, as well as married couples. A lot of families have lived here for as long as my family has, so they all know each other pretty well. There's only one apartment that isn't occupied by a family. Instead, it is occupied by two brothers who always keep to themselves. One day, one of their sons showed up around my age and he hasn't left since. He was really strange. He would always wear a hoodie and then run to his basement. I never saw his face because he always had the hood on. He lived on the first floor and often got into his place by jumping through the window. I never met them because I am busy with my schedule. However, one day he started sitting on the top of the staircase that leads to my apartment. This was pretty strange because his apartment unit was on the other side of the complex and on the first floor. I brushed it off at first, but it started happening every day. When I would come home from school, he would always be there. When my boyfriend at the time would drop me off at night, typically around 10:30 to 11, he would be there. Sometimes when I would leave and come back hours later, he would still be in the same exact spot as if he didn't move throughout the 5+ hours that I was gone. At that point, I decided to tell my parents and boyfriend about it, and they became very vigilant. My boyfriend would park his car and walk me to my door every night that he dropped me off. Once he saw my boyfriend, it seemed like he stopped sitting on the staircase. I thought it was over, but of course, it wasn't. Then he started waiting for me at my bus stop. The bus that I took home from school stopped right across the street from my home, so it's a really short walk. One day, when I was getting off a solid waiting at the bus stop, once he saw me get off, he followed me into the complex and sat on the staircase yet again. He would also start following me whenever I would walk my dog. At this point, my parents were getting really upset. My mom told my neighbors that my stalker was following me. They made sure he didn't bother me, and if I was alone, they would start a conversation so I could get inside. One day, I got a friend request on Facebook from this guy. He never spoke to me before then, but he found my name and location on Facebook. My mom tried talking to the man's father about it, but they never answered our door when she knocked. So I'm thinking it can't get any worse than this, right? I mean, he seemed pretty harmless, so I wasn't too worried about it. I was wrong. One day when I returned to my boyfriend's house, my mom had told me that she had something to tell me, but she didn't want me to get spooked. She proceeded to tell me that when she was walking towards the kitchen to get a glass of water, she saw something in the trees begin to move. Now, our kitchen has a huge window that takes up most of the wall. In front of a window, there's this really huge tree. If someone were to climb the tree, you could see directly into our apartment. Well, guess what? When my mom took a closer look, she realized that my neighbor was sitting in the tree, looking right into the apartment. My mom called my dad over, and when my neighbor saw my dad, he jumped off the tree. At that moment, I felt like my peace had been stolen from me. Without a police report, but when the police went looking for him, he was long gone. Apparently, there were snack wrappers and a hidden blanket in between the leaves of the trees. The police seemed to think that that wasn't the first time he was in the tree. I couldn't help but wonder how many times he saw me walking around and I had no idea of it. It's been about 6 months and I haven't seen him since. His father still lives in the complex, but there's no sign of him. The police haven't been able to find him, so I have no idea what happened to him. But hopefully, for me, I won't see him ever again. Story 2. I recently bought a very run-down fixer-upper in a city in a more rural area. About an hour from where I live next door to me lives a couple, maybe in their late 40s, with their 2 young kids. If I had to guess, I think one was maybe 1 and the other was 3 years old. For the first few weeks, I assumed the man was divorced as I never saw his wife there. Even now, I've only seen her about twice in 3 months. He was your typical friendly neighbor character, offering to lend me tools and giving me slightly overbearing but really good advice. I never really thought anything of it, until it seemed I saw more and more of him with each visit. Every time I was there, he would kind of saunter over for no reason at all. We do share a driveway, so this isn't overly strange, but it often seemed like whenever I was outside, he would suddenly pop out of his house and find a reason to chat with me. Now, I'm not a forte and I don't look like a Marilyn Monroe, but I do think that he thinks I'm much younger than him, hence the slightly overbearing demeanor. However, I do like to be alone sometimes, and one reason why I like doing things myself is because it gives me time to think. Today was really weird. At first, I didn't want to come out of the house because I have been seeing things in virtually every time that I came here. Once I parked my car around the corner, that way people couldn't see it. I told them that when they came later to fill up my gas tank, they could park their car there instead. But when someone knocked on the door, I hid in one of the rooms until he left. I peek out a side window and then I see him there with his daughter. I'm a little surprised that he even knew I was there. But for once, I decided not to open it like I usually would. I just really didn't want to be friendly with him as much anymore. He goes away. Maybe about 15 minutes later, I'm happily painting away when I hear another knocking on the back door. I ignore it yet again. Then he comes around to the front door, rings the doorbell once that immediately begins to pound on the quiet, fragile door. I could absolutely scream at this point. It was the kind of bashing that said, "I know you're there, and I will not be ignored." Really freaking aggressive and quite alarming. So of course, I now have no choice but to answer the damn door, since it really did sound like he was going to break it. He's there, and without his daughter, and he invites me over for some lunch. Well, this is a first. And though I know it might be rude to say no, I made the excuse that I was a vegetarian, and that he probably made a meat dish, which he did. He was frowning and he said all the weird crap, and it really set alarm bells off in my head. He's never invited me to lunch before, and even though he had a young daughter with him, I just felt like it was some kind of a weird, I plan to see you no matter what kind of way. He actually nodded to himself as he said it, so I don't really know if he's just overbearing or he's being a total creep. All I know is I definitely feel creeped out. I think I'm just gonna do my best to continue avoiding him, and I really hope he'll leave me alone. Story 3. My children and I live in an apartment complex. A refugee family has moved into a unit at the end of the hall. There are 4 adults and 3 children. My daughter is about 6 years old and has made friends with the young girls in the family, and she spends a lot of time playing with them. There's a bit of a language barrier with the adults, so we usually communicate with them through the children, who then translate for us. The adults speak some English, but not very much at all. I'm not sure how to handle the situation, since I can't really speak to the parents directly because of the language barrier. So here's what happened. A couple of days ago, my daughter was outside playing Barbies with the girls. They were sitting in the grass nearby the girls' patio. One of the adult men came out and looked directly at my daughter and then said, "Nice, beautiful," with a really creepy smile. So maybe it was just a compliment, and if so, there's no harm in that. But, well, yesterday, my daughter and I went from home on a shopping trip. When we exited the bus, she ran ahead of me since I had packages that were slowing me down. She was probably about 20 feet in front of me. When the same man was driving down the road, he saw my daughter and slowed down, creeping along next to her with a frighteningly creepy grin, nodding his head. It was the way that a grown man was filling looks at a grown woman that he wants to pounce. It was absolutely sickening the way that he was looking at my daughter. I was literally watching him the whole time, and without taking my eyes off of this creep, I called my daughter's name, but he looked up. He sped up and kept looking at her. My daughter is only 6 years old. I am disgusted and scared over this. I am not sure what to do, other than keep my daughter away from that family. I've had an intense talk with her about stranger danger and what's to do if he approaches, or maybe I'm overthinking this. But that gut feeling of fear and disgust that I got when I saw his facial expression, well, it's telling me he didn't have innocent thoughts when he was looking at my daughter. I honestly just really don't know what to do. I'm going to do my best to keep this creepy man away from my daughter. If he knows what's good for him, he'll stay the hell away. Story 4. So the story happened to me around 8 years ago. I lived in a cheap apartment complex with 3 other apartments on my floor, and I lived on the 3rd floor of these 3 neighbors. I partially knew one of them. He was some young dude who used to work out at the same gym as me, but the one next to me really creeped me out. There was an older, grumpy guy who never talked to anyone. Sometimes I would watch him searching through our trash, but never found out what he was looking for, or why he did it. One night at around 11 p.m., I heard some really loud noises, which sounded like someone was coughing to death, and it was at the grumpy man's place. I got up and went to knock on the door of the guy in my apartment building. I was hurt by someone who came to the door. The old guy who lives there shouted something that sounded like, "What do you want?" in a really strong accent. I wasn't sure what he said, so when I asked if he wanted me to call an ambulance, he just told me to screw off. I got really annoyed and went back to bed. At least no one was coughing the rest of the night. After this night, he started watching me through his window every time I went outside to have a smoke. When I finally got my degree, I decided to move back to my parents. Like I said, it was a really crappy place, and the guy next to me really creeped me the crap out, so I just really wanted to stay out of there. A couple of years later, I ran into the dude that I used to go to the gym with. He told me that the creepy old man had actually strangled a prostitute in his apartment, and according to him, he hid the body in his closet. He tried to dispose of the body near the woods of the apartment, but he pretty much immediately got busted. I found out later that he originally came from South Africa, where he sat in prison for about 10 years. Apparently, he was in for carjacking and almost killing someone. I often refuse to talk about this because I'm still shivering when I think back to when I lived in the crappy apartment. I'm really glad I got out of there when I did, and that really crappy old man who killed someone. I really hope that you rot in prison, and I never see you again. Story 5. This happened about 6 months ago. I lived in an apartment with 4 floors. There's a man that lives on the 4th floor. He's middle-way aged. I've always only seen him around with his mom because she's the one who guides him around and usually doesn't leave him unattended. I notice that every time I see him, this man always has his eyes stuck on me. Literally, once he sees me, there's no walking away. He has the creepiest stare I've ever seen. Fast forward to the day where I felt the most vulnerable. I was walking up to my apartment complex. Usually, the walk is a bit long. Once I am a few steps from my door, I notice someone. It is the same person as before. He is alone this time, and that makes me kind of scared. Not really knowing what he will do, he only stares at me for a moment when he sees me, then he leaves. 5 minutes after that, I'm in my room just eating, and my mom is talking to someone in the living room behind me. I walk out, and it was him. Why the hell did my mom think that it was okay to let this strange guy in our house? I just really don't know. Apparently he was ringing the doorbell non-stop until we got someone's attention, which happened to be my mom's. My mom opened the door and asked what he wanted. Then he shoves my mom, pushes the door open, and walks in and then points to my room. Then say, my girlfriend's in there," which is really creepy that he knew exactly which room to point to. My mom proceeded to tell him that no one was home at the moment, and then, my sister heard him and then walked out. My sister kicked him out of the house immediately. A couple of minutes passed by and he's ringing the doorbell again, non-stop. This later goes on for another annoying 2 hours with the doorbell constantly ringing every now and then. My sister would look into the peephole. This man has his whole face in the peephole and is laughing to himself, while my sister is just cursing him out on the other side. He bangs the door here and there, but is constantly being creepy through the peephole. Every other time that we look into the peephole, he either has his head down, his face, and the peephole, or him, walking back and forth and laughing at himself. This proceeds for a while until I call the cops. And you know how that goes. I called 3 times and waited for about 2 hours, waiting on the other side of the door so this man would leave. Well, the cops didn't do crap. I haven't seen this man since, but I'm still pretty scared of any future encounters. I never want to experience this again.